I should have known better than to leave that late. The sun had already slipped below the horizon before I even made it past the city limits, and now the road stretched on forever, swallowed whole by darkness. Somewhere between this will be freeing, and this was a terrible idea. I lost cell service. The last 3 bars on my screen flickered out like dying fireflies. It was just me, the open highway, and my thoughts. None of them were particularly kind. The breakup was still fresh. The apartment felt like a crime scene I hadn't cleaned up yet. His scent still clung to the hoodie I refused to take off, even now. So I did what any emotionally reckless man might do. I stuffed a duffel bag, tossed it in the back seat, and drove west without telling a soul where I was going. Somewhere rural. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could stop feeling like I was falling apart in public. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. A loud pop jolted through the car, followed by a hard tug on the steering wheel. The vehicle lurched right, the front end dipping with a hiss that could only mean one thing. Flat tire. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, heart pounding like I'd just been hit. I got out, slammed the door harder than necessary, and crouched beside the front passenger tire. Destroyed. The rubber was ripped open like peeled fruit. There were no town signs for miles, and the last gas station I'd seen had to be at least 40 minutes back. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not even one sad little bar. Perfect, I muttered, kicking a rock into the dark. Out there, the wind felt different. Colder. Quieter. It didn't hum with city life. It whispered through brush and barbed wire. I stood there with my hands on my hips, trying to will a solution into existence. I didn't have a spare. I wouldn't have known how to fix it if I did. And I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. So I waited. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Every sound, the rustle of weeds, the crack of something unseen beyond the roadside, made my nerves tighten. I hadn't been truly scared in a long time. Not really. But out there, under a sky too huge and dark to understand, I felt fear crawl slowly up my spine. Then I saw headlights. A single pair of beams cut through the darkness behind me, getting closer. For one brief second, I felt relief. Then doubt. What if it wasn't someone safe? What if I'd watched too many movies that started exactly like this? The truck slowed as it approached, gravel crunching beneath heavy tires. It came to a stop just behind my car, engine idling, casting long shadows in a yellow glow. My breath caught. Then the driver's door opened, and he stepped out. Boots first. Dusty denim. A worn jacket. A cowboy hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. He looked like someone carved straight out of the land itself, lean, weathered, and solid. He walked toward me slowly, like a man used to being watched. "You all right?" he asked, voice low and even. Something about the way he spoke, like he wasn't rushing, like he already knew I wasn't all right, put me a little at ease. Still, I straightened up and tried to sound less pathetic than I felt. "Flat tire," I said. "No signal. No spare." He gave a small nod, like he was confirming a suspicion. "Figures," he said. "Roads out here are hell on cheap rubber." I should have been more on edge. Stranger. Isolated road. No backup. But he didn't feel dangerous. Just observant. Like he'd already assessed me and decided I wasn't a threat. "I'm Wade," he said after a moment. "Live a few miles that way." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "You from the city?" I gave a half shrug. "Yeah. I was headed somewhere. Just driving honestly." "Figured." His mouth twitched. "You've got that running from something look." That startled a laugh out of me. Bitter. Surprised, real. "That obvious?" He smirked. "You're wearing sneakers out here. That's all the proof I need." He crouched by the ruined tire, ran a hand over the damage, and clicked his tongue. "You're not going anywhere tonight," he said. "Not unless you want to tear up your axle." I already knew that, but hearing it out loud still hit like a weight settling in my chest. "I can call a tow in the morning," he said. Then he stood and brushed off his jeans. "Or, you can follow me back to the ranch. Got a place you can crash. Coffee, too." I blinked. "You're offering to help?" Just like that. He tilted his head. "Wouldn't be much of a neighbor if I left you out here, would I?" I hesitated. Every voice in my head told me to be careful. But those same voices hadn't exactly led me anywhere good lately. And I was cold, tired, and one bad thought away from crying in the dirt. So I nodded. "All right," I said. "Lead the way, Wade." He turned, boots crunching over gravel as he walked back to his truck. And I followed him, having no idea just how strange and warm the night was about to become. Wade's truck suited him perfectly. An early 2000s Ford with faded two-tone paint, dulled by years of sun, dust, and work. The kind of truck that had earned every dent. He opened the back and pulled out a toolkit, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a jug of water. Setting them on my hood like this was just another ordinary Tuesday. "You got a jack in the trunk?" he asked, already crouching by the tire. "Maybe," I said, then winced at how helpless that sounded. Wade didn't laugh. He just gave me a crooked little grin, the kind that looked rare but well-practiced. "Let's find out." We rummaged through my trunk together, him guiding me without ever making me feel stupid. Turns out I did have a jack, buried beneath a blanket, and an unopened bottle of antifreeze I didn't remember buying. "All right," he said, straightening. "I'll lift it. You hold the flashlight and aim where I'm working. Mind the shadows." His tone was calm, unhurried, not condescending, just capable. The kind of voice that makes you believe things might be okay, even when you're stranded on a deserted highway in the middle of nowhere with a tire that looks like it got mauled by a wild animal. I held the light steady while he worked, watching his hands move with practiced ease. They were calloused and scarred, veins rising under the skin like rivers on a map. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was simple things: weather, dust storms, how flat tires were practically a local rite of passage out there. "You said you were just driving," he said after a while. "That code for something?" I glanced at him, unsure how honest to be. But something about the open dark, the scrape of his wrench against metal, loosened something in me. "Break up," I admitted. "Needed to get away before I broke something. Or said something I'd regret." He nodded. "Didn't pry." "Yeah," he said after a moment. "Been there." That was it. No questions. No judgment. Just a quiet echo of understanding. By the time he tightened the last lug nut, the air between us had changed. Less tense. Less guarded. Like we were two people caught in the same storm, just on different boats. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and handed me the water. "Drink," he said. "You've been sweating like a politician in church." I laughed so suddenly I nearly choked on it. "Thanks," I said after a sip. "Seriously, you didn't have to stop." "Didn't have to," he agreed. "But I did." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Then he said, "Tell you what, you can pay me back." I stiffened. "How?" Wade didn't answer right away. He walked back to his truck, tossed the rag inside, and leaned against the door. The night was still and alive with insects. Somewhere far off, a coyote called into the dark. "Follow me to the ranch," he said at last. I blinked. "That's it." He shrugged. "I've got coffee. Extra room if you don't want to risk another tire tonight. Place is just up the road." A silence passed between us, small and crackling. "You sure?" I asked. "I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't," he said simply. "Besides, I figure you could use some quiet." He wasn't wrong. And there was something in his eyes, not quite a challenge, not quite an invitation. Just steadiness. Like he'd already decided I could be trusted, and now it was my turn to decide the same. "Okay," I said finally. "Lead the way." Wade nodded once, like that settled it. He climbed into his truck and waited while I got back into my car. The new tire held, wobbling only slightly as I pulled onto the road behind him. And as we drove off into the dark, the strangest thing happened. I stopped feeling lost. The road to Wade's ranch curved through open fields like a question mark, bordered by old trees and rusted fences. His taillights were the only stars close enough to follow, pulsing red in the black. After about 10 minutes, he turned onto a narrow dirt road with no sign and no gate, just a battered mailbox leaning sideways like it was tired of standing. His headlights swept over a low, sprawling house with a tin roof and a wraparound porch that looked like it had weathered more than a few storms. When I stepped out of the car, the first thing I heard was a bark. A dog, woolly, spotted, and very clearly in charge, trotted over to me like he'd been expecting company. He sniffed my knee, circled once, then leaned against my leg with a grunt of approval. "That's Bo," Wade said, stepping down from his truck. "He's friendlier than he looks, so long as you don't mess with his breakfast." Bo huffed, as if confirming that statement. The ranch smelled like cedar, soil, and distant wood smoke, the kind of scent that settles into your clothes and stays there. Wade unlocked the front door, waved me inside, then bent to unlace his boots without a word. I followed suit, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place my city sneakers looked beside his worn leather boots. Inside, the house felt like stepping into a different pace of life. Not cleaner, not fancier, just slower, quieter. The living room opened into a wide kitchen lit by a single low-hanging bulb above a scarred pine table. The counters were cluttered, but not messy. The walls held old photographs, horses, landscapes, family, some framed, some just pinned up like memories that didn't need polishing. "Make yourself at home," Wade said, dropping his keys in a bowl by the door. "I'll put on coffee." The machine sputtered to life, stainless steel and ancient. Wade moved through the kitchen like a man who didn't have to think about where anything belonged. I stood awkwardly for a moment before finally sliding into one of the chairs. Bo flopped down at my feet with a sigh so dramatic it felt personal. "You hungry?" Wade asked, already pulling things from the fridge. I started to say no, but my stomach answered for me. "All right then," he muttered with a smirk. "You're getting fed." 10 minutes later, he set 2 plates on the table. Grilled cheese, thick cut and perfectly crisp, and scrambled eggs from a cast-iron skillet with some green herb I couldn't name, but tasted like it had been picked an hour ago. It was simple, and it was perfect. But something caught my eye. The way he placed the second plate across from me, not beside me, at the far end of the table, like that spot meant something. I found myself glancing at that chair more than once, wondering who used to sit there. I didn't ask. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was gentle, the kind that only exists between people who've both seen storms and don't feel the need to explain the weather. "You live out here alone?" I asked quietly, mostly just to fill the air. He nodded. "Just me and Bo now." He sipped his coffee and looked toward the window, where moonlight stretched over the fields. "Must get lonely," I said. Wade didn't answer right away. He scratched behind Bo's ears, then leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes," he said. "But quiet's got its own kind of company." I let that answer settle. The chair across from me still felt occupied by something I couldn't name, and Wade didn't need me digging at old wounds. "The bathroom's down the hall on the right," he said eventually. "Guest room's made up. Door sticks a little, kick it at the bottom and it'll catch." I blinked. "Wait, you're actually offering me a room?" He looked at me like I was slow. "Ain't gonna send you back out into the dark," he said. "I told you could crash, didn't I?" I nodded, still a little stunned. "Yeah. I just didn't think you meant an actual room." He grinned then, a real grin this time, teeth slightly crooked, one dimple showing. "Wasn't planning on offering you the barn." Something warm and unexpected shifted inside my chest. "Thanks," I said. Seriously. He didn't say you're welcome. Just nodded once and stood, gathering the dishes like it was no big deal at all. I found the bathroom, then the guest room. A modest little space with a small window, a checkered quilt, and a dresser that smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. I kicked the door like Wade told me to, and it clicked shut with a sigh. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The faint clink of dishes in the kitchen. Bo's tail thumping once against the floor. The deep quiet of a house built to hold more than one story. There was no TV humming. No streetlights bleeding through the curtains. No distant sirens or strangers yelling through apartment walls. Just the creak of the porch rocking chair. And the memory of that empty chair at dinner. I woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of something sizzling in cast iron. For a split second, I forgot where I was. The quilt was soft. Morning light crept through the small window, painting the wooden floor gold. Birds sang outside. Actual birds, not car alarms or garbage trucks or the couple who used to scream at each other in the hallway outside my apartment. Bo was curled by the door like a sentry. Then the night before came back in pieces. The flat tire. Wade's crooked smile. Dinner. The guest room. The empty chair. I sat up, ran a hand through my hair, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. Wade was already at the stove, dressed and halfway into the day, flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows, jeans on, boots laced, like he'd been awake for hours. "Morning," he said without turning. "Hope you like strong coffee and slightly burned everything." "Sounds gourmet," I said. He nodded toward the table.
"Sit. Eat."
I obeyed, trying not to feel too much like a guest. The plate he handed me was piled high, bacon, eggs, 2 pancakes stacked like bricks, and 1 lone slice of cantaloupe like a peace offering from someone who didn't usually bother with fruit.
"Thanks," I said.
"You really didn't have to." "I know," he said gently, "but I did." We ate in silence for a minute, Bo watching every bite like he could will it to fall. Then Wade cleared his throat. "So," he said, "there is something you can do to pay me back." I looked up mid-bite. "Oh." He leaned back in his chair, coffee mug in hand, studying me like he was deciding whether to keep going. "It's my ma's birthday tomorrow." "Okay," I said slowly. "I always drive into town for it. Big family dinner. Her sisters, my cousins, people from church. Potluck, porch lights, bad singing." I smiled. "Sounds charming." "It's not," he deadpanned. Then he added, "Not when you're the only one who shows up alone every damn year." A beat passed. Then he said, "I want you to come with me." I blinked.
"Wait, what?" "Just for the night," he said.
"Pretend to be someone with me." I stared at him, then laughed in disbelief. "You want me to be your fake date?" He didn't smile. "I'm tired of the looks," he said quietly. "The questions. The aunt who keeps trying to set me up with the mayor's daughter. The cousin who whispers like I'm broken." The room went still around us. "I'm not out to my whole family," he said. "Some know. Some pretend they don't. I'm not asking you to do anything weird. Just show up, sit by me, let them think what they want." I stared at him, stunned. Not because he'd asked, but because I could see how much it had cost him to do it. He wasn't playing games. He was tired. Tired of being treated like a question no one was brave enough to ask out loud. "Why me?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He shrugged. "You're here. You're easy to talk to. You don't feel like a stranger anymore." That landed harder than I expected. I looked down at my plate, then out the window. Sunlight had fully spilled across the ranch, lighting the trees like a postcard. I had nowhere else to be. No one waiting for me. And maybe, just maybe, I was as tired of being a question mark as he was. "I don't even know what to wear to a ranch town birthday party," I said at last. Wade's smile returned, crooked, warm, a little smug. "Don't worry," he said. "I've got a flannel that'll fit you just fine." I sighed. This is absurd. That a yes? I looked at him. Then I nodded. "I'm in." "Good," he said, rising to take his plate to the sink. "You're gonna make my ma weak. She's been waiting for me to bring somebody home since Bush was in office." "Which Bush?" He smirked. "Exactly." Bo barked once, like even he approved. And just like that, I agreed to be a Cowboy's fake date at a family birthday party in the middle of nowhere. Not because I owed him. Because somewhere between the broken tire and that empty chair, I wanted to. By the time we pulled into town the next evening, I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin. Wade had insisted I borrow one of his flannels, soft, sun-faded, sleeves rolled to my elbows. It smelled like cedar and hay, like the inside of his truck. The collar sat a little wrong on me, but he said I looked the part. The smile he gave me when he said it made me forget how nervous I actually was. The party was already in full swing when we pulled up outside a modest farmhouse strung with lights and laughter. Cars lined the gravel driveway. Kids chased each other across the yard. A folding table on the porch groaned under casseroles and peach cobbler. "Ready?" Wade asked beneath the brim of his hat. "Nope," I said. "But let's do it anyway." He led me through the front gate with one steady hand against my lower back, and I felt it then, that sharp little jolt under my ribs. Not fear of getting caught in a lie. The fact that his touch didn't feel pretend. Inside, the party was exactly what he'd promised. Women in floral blouses, men in beyond-the-lookout ties and cowboy boots, everyone talking over everyone else. A baby cried somewhere in the back. Gospel music played from a radio perched on an old piano. The air smelled like pot roast and nostalgia. Wade's mother found us first. She was maybe 5 feet tall, round as a pie, with silver hair pinned back and bright eyes that missed absolutely nothing. The second she saw him, her whole face lit up. "There's my boy," she said, pulling him into a full-body hug. Then she turned to me, curious and delighted. "And oh," she said, "this must be the friend you told me about." Wade grinned. "Mama, this is Eli." I reached out a hand. "Nice to meet." She ignored it and pulled me into a hug, so quick I barely had time to react. "I'm Joyce," she said into my shoulder. "And it's about damn time he brought someone." And just like that, the lie began. Except strangely, it didn't feel like one. Joyce paraded us through the house like honored guests. She introduced me to cousins, neighbors, and a man named Earl who had apparently known Wade since he was knee-high to a fence post. Everyone smiled, nodded, offered me sweet tea and cobbler. Nobody looked twice. Nobody questioned us. Somewhere between the second helping of baked beans and the fourth retelling of how Wade and I had met at a gas station with terrible coffee, the story stopped feeling invented and started feeling lived in. At one point, Wade reached under the table and took my hand. Just a simple squeeze. But the glance we shared afterward sent my pulse into chaos. Later, someone turned on a portable speaker and shoved the furniture aside. Old country songs spilled into the room like honey, and couples started dancing, some two-stepping, some just swaying close enough to make the rhythm irrelevant. Wade looked at me. I raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "Come on," he said. "They'll think we're fighting if we don't." So I let him pull me into the middle of the room. His hand found the small of my back again and we started slow. A little awkward at first, then not awkward at all. He led with an ease that surprised me. His body knew the music before mine did. My hands settled on his shoulders, fingers brushing warm flannel, and somewhere along the way, I stopped counting steps. We danced through 2 songs, then 3. And somewhere in the middle of the 4th, our eyes locked. The world narrowed. There was a pause, a breath between notes, like even the music had gone still. He leaned in close enough for me to smell mint on his breath. Close enough to feel the question hanging there. My heart slammed against my ribs. I tilted my head, lips parting. "Wade." We both froze. He stepped back like he'd just woken from something. A woman holding a tray of deviled eggs was waving him toward the kitchen, calling something about his aunt needing help. He nodded once, his eyes flicking back to me before he turned away. And just like that, the moment shattered. I stood there for a second, my arms suddenly empty, while the music kept playing like nothing had happened. Beau had more sense than either of us, I thought bitterly, spotting him curled under the snack table, one eye half open like he'd seen this exact scene before. I grabbed another drink, slipped out to the porch, and let the night air cool my face. Pretend or not, something about that moment had been real. Too real. And I had no idea what to do with that. The drive back to the ranch was quiet. Wade kept one hand on the wheel, his hat pulled low like armor. I could still feel the ghost of his hand at my back from the dance, still taste the almost of that interrupted moment. Neither of us brought it up, but the silence wasn't tense. It was careful, fragile, like we were both afraid to step too hard and break whatever had formed between us. When we got back, Beau greeted us at the door like we'd been gone for a week. He circled Wade twice, gave me a suspicious sniff, then wandered off like he had reluctantly approved my continued existence. Wade went into the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of whiskey. No ice. No warning. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the porch. The stars were out in full force. Real stars, not city haze, not orange glow, but the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a scar of light. The kind of sky that makes you feel both tiny and infinite. We settled into the rocking chairs, boots propped on the railing, wood creaking beneath us. He handed me a glass. I took a sip and nearly coughed. "That's aggressive," I muttered. He chuckled. Puts hair on your chest. I looked over at him. The porch light caught enough of his face to show the edge of a smile. Worn, guarded, but real. After a while, I asked, did they suspect anything? He shrugged. Probably. Doesn't matter. They saw what they wanted to see. He went quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. That I'm okay. That I've got someone. His voice dropped on the last part, like he wasn't sure he believed it himself. We drank in silence for a while before he spoke again. There was someone, he said, staring out at the dark. A long time ago. I stayed still. Waited. His name was Carter. Worked a neighboring ranch for a few seasons. Big smile. Knew how to fix anything with an engine. He'd come over after work. Sit right where you're sitting. He swallowed. We didn't say it out loud. Not back then. But we knew. I turned toward him slightly, listening. One night, we got caught. Nothing dramatic. His brother saw us sitting too close, looking too long. Next thing I knew, Carter was gone. Quit. Left town the next day. He took another sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. Never said goodbye, he said. I tried to call. Never heard back. I'm sorry, I said, because it was the only thing I had. He gave one small nod, the kind that said he'd packed that pain away years ago, but never really let it go. What about you? He asked after a while. What did you leave behind? I let out a humorless laugh. A guy who talked over me in every conversation. Who made me feel like an accessory he didn't quite want seen in daylight. I stared into my glass. He cheated. Not always physically, but enough. I think he liked keeping me small. Made him feel bigger. Wade turned slightly toward me. You leave him, or did he leave you? I stopped apologizing for existing, I said. That was enough to make him go. Wade nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. We sat there for a long time after that, with the crickets singing and the old porch settling beneath us. Our glasses were nearly empty when Wade finally said, so quietly I almost missed it. Don't get used to this. I looked over at him. He wasn't smiling. I don't usually let people stay, he said. The words landed between us like something sacred. Not a warning. Not regret. Just truth. I won't, I said, even though part of me already had. He stood slowly, stretching the stiffness out of his shoulders. I'll see you in the morning. I followed him inside. Bo had already claimed his spot near the door, one eye open, monitoring everything. Wade pointed toward the guest room. Door sticks, he said. Kick it like last time. I nodded. As I passed him in the hallway, his hand brushed mine. Not quite accidental. Not quite deliberate. I closed the guest room door behind me, kicked it shut, and stood there in the dark for a long minute. Through the wall, I heard the soft thud of Wade's boots hitting the floor one after the other. Then silence. We slept in separate rooms that night. But neither of us slept much. The sun was barely up when I packed my bag. The guest room looked exactly as it had when I arrived. Quilt smoothed, boots by the door, duffel on the chair. But something in me had shifted. I stood at the window for a while, watching the sky turn peach over the hills. The fields rippled gently in the morning breeze like they didn't care whether I stayed or left. My tire was fixed. My heart, not so much. I slung the duffel over my shoulder and stepped into the hallway, expecting silence. Instead, the smell of bacon and coffee greeted me again, warm, familiar, disarming. Wade was at the stove. Same worn flannel. Same quiet focus. He didn't look up when I walked in, just gestured with his spatula toward the table. You like blueberry pancakes? I hesitated. I was gonna hit the road. You've got a little time, he said. Sit. Eat. So I dropped my bag by the door and sat down. He set a plate in front of me and poured a mug of coffee, like this was routine. Like mornings like this happened all the time. Like we weren't standing inside a fragile little bubble that could burst the second I turned the ignition. I appreciate everything, I said quietly. The food, the room, the fake boyfriend duties. He smirked. You weren't bad at it. We ate in silence for a while, Bo chewing on something under the table that I sincerely hoped was not a boot. Then Wade stood, stretched and said, "Come on. I'll show you the horses." I frowned. "I thought you had work." "This is work," he said, already grabbing his hat. "Fence got knocked down near the south pasture. You ever hold a post steady?"
No.
"You're about to." The pasture spread out in soft golden waves, dotted with horses and weathered fence posts. Wade handed me gloves and a hammer, then showed me how to hold the rail, where to brace the wood, how to angle the nails so they didn't split. We worked side by side in the late morning sun, the kind of quiet between us that didn't need filling. I kept sneaking glances at him when he wasn't looking. The line of his jaw in the light. The way he focused when something wouldn't line up right. "You do this every day?" I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Most days," he said. "Keeps me grounded." "You ever get bored?" He paused, then looked at me. "Not with the right company." I swallowed hard. When the fence was done, we walked the property line. He showed me the creek that overflowed in spring. The barn where he used to hide to smoke at 16. The old oak tree where his father had carved initials decades ago. Everything he showed me felt like more than land. It felt like trust. Eventually we stopped on a low hill overlooking the pasture. I turned to him, my heart starting up all over again. "This what you do with all your stranded strangers?" I asked. He chuckled softly. "You're the first." I looked away, then back. "Why'd you really ask me to stay?" He shrugged, but it wasn't casual. "Seemed like you needed somewhere quiet." He met my eyes. And I didn't mind the company. I stepped closer. "And this morning?" Something flickered across his face. "I was hoping," he said, "you might stay one more day." There it was again. That pause. That invitation hidden just beneath the words. I reached out and touched the edge of his hand with mine. He didn't pull away. And when he leaned in, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder. No cinematic swell. Just slow.
Certain. Warm.
His hand slid to the back of my neck, thumb brushing lightly beneath my jaw like he was memorizing the shape of me. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. Nothing needed saying. There were no promises. No declarations. Just two men standing in the open, finally seen. The next morning was sharp and bright, the sky a clear blue that made everything feel possible. I stood by my car with my duffel over one shoulder and the trunk open. I'd folded the guest room blanket, packed the flannel Wade had loaned me, even returned the gloves from the fence repair. Everything was where it belonged. Except me. I'd meant to leave earlier, before the sun got too high, but something in me kept stalling. Bo sitting at my feet with his chin on his paws didn't help. He had that same knowing look again, like he could tell I wasn't ready. The ranch looked different in daylight. Less like a postcard. More like a home. Not perfect, but steady. Lived in.
Trustworthy.
Just like Wade. He stepped out onto the porch with a coffee mug in hand, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans like it was the most natural thing in the world. He came down slowly, boots crunching on gravel, and stopped beside me. "This time your tire's good," he said, nudging it with the side of his boot. "Appreciate the vote of confidence," I said. He gave a low laugh, then took a sip of coffee. The silence between us was warm, stretched tight with all the things neither of us quite knew how to say. I closed the trunk, but I didn't move toward the driver's door. Instead, I looked at him. Really looked. His hair was still damp from a shower. A little curl at the nape of his neck caught the sunlight. Faint smile lines touched the corners of his eyes, and I found myself wondering how often he smiled like that, and whether I'd ever get to see it again. "I guess this is goodbye," I said. The words felt heavier than they should have. Wade nodded once. "Guess it is." But neither of us moved. Then he said, soft as a breath, "I meant it, you know." I looked at him. Meant what? He glanced down at the gravel, then back at me with that same steady gaze that had been undoing me since the side of the road. "You paid me back." I frowned. "Wade, I didn't do anything." "You did," he said gently. "You showed up. You listened. You didn't ask for anything except honesty." He paused, then added, almost like it surprised him too. "And you made me laugh." Hell, I hadn't done that in months. Something tightened in my throat. "Was that all?" I asked softly.
"No," he said.
The wind stirred between us, carrying wood smoke and coffee. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen, he said. Not for what I'm trying to hide. Just seen. I took a slow breath. So, what now? He didn't answer right away. He just stepped a little closer, until we were nearly shoulder to shoulder. Now, he said, you go wherever you were headed. And I'll be here. Fence still needs mending. Coffee still burns at the edges. His mouth twitched. But maybe next time, you don't wait for flat tire to come back. A beat passed. Maybe you just come back. I nodded slowly, my heart pulling in two directions at once. I didn't kiss him. Not there.
Not then.
Instead, I reached for his hand and held it for one long moment. Then I got into the car. The engine turned over on the first try, and I rolled down the gravel drive slow enough to memorize every inch. Wade stood where I'd left him, one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around that chipped ceramic mug. Bo sat beside him like a sentinel, ears up, eyes following me. I drove for a full mile, past the mailbox, past the cattle gate, past the curve where the hills swallowed the house from view. Then I pulled over. I sat there with both hands on the wheel, engine idling, staring at the road ahead. It was wide open.
Clear.
And yet the seat beside me felt too empty. My chest, on the other hand, felt full. Full of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. So I put the car in reverse. Because maybe, just maybe, it had never been just a favor. Optional polished outro. If this slow burn romance under the stars touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more emotional, unexpected love stories just like this one. What would you do? Would you have turned the car around? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. More stories are coming soon. From midnight highways to quiet ranches, love always finds a way.
Stay tuned.